guys, this is Dawn. Welcome to Gulf Coast October, and in this series I'm reading my book, Enchanted by St. Yaya. Today is chapter 4, Seashells in the Windows and a Flower in Her Hair, and I would love it if you would hang out. Hey you guys, if you get a chance, if you're enjoying this at all, if you would go to Goodreads or maybe even Amazon, if you can figure out a way to leave a review on my book, that would be really helpful. But you don't have to. I just want you to enjoy the book. Okay, chapter 4. Seashells in the Windows and a Flower in Her Hair. Claire and I spent the next few hours at the beach making small talk, picking up seashells, and drawing doodles in the sand with driftwood. I worried about her pale skin in the hot sun, but she assured me that she'd spent plenty of time in the sun and hasn't burned in ages, so I let it go. She told me a little bit about why she moved to Bay St. Yaya from Long Beach. She owned and rented quite a few old houses and condos all along the southern portions of Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana. Some of them are so old that they have been in her family for over a century. Sometimes when a tenant moves out, they leave behind thick personal energy. This is grounds for renovation. She would move in while fixing the place up. Walls got painted, plumbing was given maintenance, windows got replaced, roofs were overhauled, yards got landscaped, and appliances were either fixed or tossed out altogether. Meanwhile, by making crafts, daily baking, growing flowers in pots everywhere, and daily rosary devotion, the spiritual energy would be renewed. People like that leave behind these types of impressions are usually traumatized in some way. They are filled with anger and fear. I usually see it when I am in the paperwork process of a new tenant. But sometimes tragedies strike while they are there, or things are brought home from somewhere else. But love always wins over fear, dearie. What do you mean they bring things home? Like ghosts? Claire smiled at my innocence. I could tell she was wondering how I was even from this place. Ghosts, energy, drug addicts, maybe alcoholics. Even a one-night stand can leave an impression for 100 years. Why do you run to someone if you can tell they have bad energy? It's not their fault. I enjoy what I do. I worked very hard to get where I am now. I've rented to all kinds of people. Most of them are beautiful, good people, but so many people walking this earth are still learning. A soul can be reborn over and over and over and still not find peace. I couldn't live with myself if I knew I'd made someone's journey harder. But doesn't that make your life harder? No, dearie, not at all. It brings me life. Do you have any idea how old I am? She held her head high in pride as she knew I would never guess correctly. Her eyes became wide and I could actually see her pupils for the first time. They turned to silver pinheads in the bright sun. I wouldn't know. If you haven't noticed, I'm not very good at finding friends my own age. Other than wrinkles being a subconscious requirement, I don't really pay attention, I said. Claire gave a swat to the air around her knee, and a noiseless chuckle lit up her face. Maybe an actual slap to the leg would knock out any balance she had left. Still smiling, she shook her long finger in my direction. I was born on October the 20th. Of 1890, she said. She placed her palms together in a praying position, touched the tips of her index fingers to her lips, and stood as still as a statue waiting for my response. I didn't respond, so she continued. I'm very, very old, child. I knew it. She was ancient, but I played it cool. Compared to what? I shrugged with one shoulder and gave her a sideways smile. I was starting to loosen up around her, and I was thankful for a female friend. I love Bird to the Moon and back, but all this time another woman in my life would have felt like a betrayal to my sweet Pauline, which is ridiculous because she only ever wanted me to be happy. I spent the whole week visiting her instead of going to the hole. We even blew off Mass, which was fine with me. I hardly go every day, but I worried that I was a bit of a bad influence on my new friend. Another thing we didn't do was find me a job. It didn't worry me too much, which was good. I had no way of foreseeing how much that these days of getting acquainted with Claire would pave some more of my pathway. Anyway, I'd never starve or thirst again as long as I had Claire nearby. Lord have mercy, that lady can pull food out of thin air. Her kitchen had a bit of renovation going on, and the fridge seemed mostly bare, yet one day she whipped up a large wooden tray of every nibbly snake you could think of. There were pecans and hazelnuts, at least 3 different cheeses, purple grapes and golden raisins, olive oil with herbs, and grain crackers. And thin slices were salami, roast beef, strawberries, and cucumbers. There was some kind of whipped blueberry stuff to spread on the crackers, and pomegranate seeds, already picked and ready to sprinkle on everything. Charcuterie, she asked me. What? I asked back. For some reason, I looked out of her kitchen window towards the beach. Then I stared back at her like it would make sense. I thought she was offering me some weird delicacy that she'd found on a beach walk. "Would you like a smorgasbord on a wooden plate, dearie?" she asked patiently. She wanted to show me how to stack different treats for different taste sensations. It still didn't make sense until she slid the pile of snacks onto the table. Now it made sense. She sat down across from me and watched me mix and match different flavors and make faces to express my levels of approval. I approved of it all. She was reading my energy to ask me questions. "So," she started, "where are you planning on sharing your resume?" My glare was a warning that I knew she was bullshitting me. We both knew damn well that I didn't have a resume. I had a hard enough time filling out job applications. My confidence level is inconsistent, and my willpower to stand behind a register for 8 hours a day died years ago. But that was the only way of making income I'd ever known. It's how they mold most of us through the schooling process. They tear down who God made and rebuilt us into blue-collar slaves. "Well, I'm thinking of seeing if they'll let me wait over at the Chinese buffet. I might ping-pong down Highway 90. There's so many options, surely I'll be hired by somebody soon." I dropped off an application at 2 filling stations. Claire was shaking her head this whole time, which was quite irritating. I have been working on sharing my truth instead of saying what I think people want to hear, and I was having a bit of a trigger from her response. "Okay, fine, what?" I snapped. "Do you want to work at a gas station, child?" she asked. Her cheeks began to suck in, and she stared at me like I was going to have an awakening before her very eyes. I let her down. "Do I want to work at a— Give me a break. Nobody wants to work at any of those places," I said softly, feeling defeated by my own fate. She got up and walked around her kitchen for a few moments, gathering up some things. She sat back down with an old jar, some dried flowers and driftwood, seashells, and a spool of thick brown string. "I saw a cute little arrangement on the counter one day when I peeked into the hole. I thought I might make me one of those. I gathered some of these things, but I bought the small seashells at the dollar store." "You've been to the hole?" I asked, even though something more was impressing me, and she knew it. She giggled. "We don't have fancy seashells on our beaches anymore." And it's always a bit humorous when rich people talk about the dollar store. But mostly, somehow, she knew something that made me wonder if she was the beldam. "I made that," I said. "I wouldn't call it an arrangement, but I made that thing with the herbs and the sticks and the little oyster shells hanging down." "You did?" she asked with a bit of excitement. I gave her a taste of my glare, but she took the bait anyway. "How did you come up with that beautiful idea?" she asked as she started putting the small shells at the bottom of the jar. "I found a green beer bottle at the beach and I wanted to recycle it. It was full of sand and I wondered where all it had been. I could tell it had washed up, so it had been floating around, sank at some point, and ended up close to the Pass Harbor. I know glass bottles can be a dime a dozen on the beach, but this one felt different. The sun was shining on it, and it was pretty in its own traveled way. I could tell it had been places." She was trying to put some of the herbs in the jar, and they were falling apart. I reached over and pulled the jar to myself. I carefully took out the herbs and dumped the shells out. I put the long, skinny driftwood sticks in first. I sorted out some of the shells with holes in them, set them to the side, and put a few whole shells in the jar. I added some of the taller herbs first, and then the rest of the whole shells. "Got any glitter?" I asked. "Sure do. Is pink okay?" Claire got up and came back with a small wicker basket of random things. "Pink is perfect. Anyway, I made it, and I thought it was pretty, and I heard that June's birthday was coming up. She runs the hole, so I gave it to her. It has been sitting there for a month now. I don't know if it's because she likes it or because she doesn't like it," I said. "Oh, she likes it," Claire replied. "She told me so. She keeps it next to the register so she has something special to look at when she's annoyed." I had no idea. I put some of the glitter in the jar carefully around the herbs and filled the gaps with smaller pieces. I rummaged around the basket and found a can of spray glue. Dang, we could have sprayed the herbs beforehand and they would not have fallen apart so much. That's okay. I tied 2 brown strings around the lip of the jar, added some pink plastic beads to the ends, and tied all 4 off with those holy shells. "Can we go outside for a minute?" Claire stuck a few pieces of flowers in her hair behind her ears. She grabbed the glitter and the spray glue, and I had the arrangement. We sat out back at the picnic table, and I sprayed the arrangement down good. Then I sprinkled glitter all over it. I set it in the middle of the picnic table, and we both gazed at it. It was really pretty. Claire smiled at me, and I smiled back. "It's beautiful. May I keep it?" she asked. "Of course. Early birthday gift," I said. We went back in, and she set it in the kitchen window amongst some larger random shells from different places. She leaned a large oyster shell up against it, which made me so happy to see. I'm not a big fan of those store-bought shells imported from somewhere else, but they are okay as long as the local shells are incorporated. "Looks a lot better with that oyster shell." Can you make a few more of these for me? I'll pay you. How about $5 each? I have all kinds of supplies around here somewhere, she said, waving her arm around. Oh, you don't have to do that. If you want some more, I can just make them, but you don't have to pay me. I'm flattered that you like them that much. I do indeed. Come back in a few days and we can make some more. I agreed. She filled up some throwaway containers with every bit of leftover shark coochie. Today's payment, she said, as she handed me a bag full of food. I rode past Bird's on the way home. His truck was gone, so I went home. My brother was out back cooking fish on the grill. I laid out the containers of fruit, pork, and crackers and hid the rest. Then I set the table. I made up a batch of powdered lemon tea, put it in a terracotta pot to get cold quicker, and I put it in the fridge. The dogs were out back too, and finally noticing the intruder, so I went to the door. Frank motioned me to come out. The dogs are always less vicious when he's around. Hey, Frank, I brought some sides and made lemonade, and I set the table too. Set it for 3, I got a buddy coming over. That's okay, I'll just take a plate to my room. You being snobby? No. Where you been? Hiding from the dogs, I laughed. I heard a super loud motorcycle and I knew his friend had arrived. You hanging out with them old people at the diner? Yes, in church. You need friends your own age. Alright, go be snobby. He smacked my arm with his flipper. Instead, I stuck around long enough to be a southern lady and say hello to his biker buddy so I could properly be relieved. Frank gave the nod to give a good old French greeting, so I took the man's hand and I kissed the air by his cheek. He did the same. He smelled like cigars and bourbon. Most of his friends are cool, but this dude gave me the willies. I went inside to shower. By the time I was done dressed, dinner was served. The boys were a bit rowdier now, so I sneaked to fetch a plate without being pulled into it. I was relatively unscathed, but my hair was still wet and brushed back neat. This apparently made me fair game for Mr. Creepypants. Your sister's kind of hot when she's dripping, the guy said, as if I were deaf. Frank punched his shoulder and told him to shut the fuck up. I went to my room and turned up the classical radio station to drown everything out. I ate dinner and stared out the window, thinking about Claire. After a bit, I heard a scratch at the bottom of the door. I turned, confused, and the door popped open. Moose and Murky stood in the doorway. May I help you? I asked. They politely waited for approval to enter. Well, come on in then, I said. They both jumped on the bed straight away. Murky, the less dominant one, made a circle in the blankets before laying down. Moose came right up to me. I froze. He stuck his wet bully breed nose right in my face, gazed in my eyes, and then licked my nose. I reached my hand to give his neck a good scratch. Murky got up and wanted in on the action, so I gave him a good scratch down too. He's creepy, ain't he? I asked. Moose snorted out a loud huff in the direction of the door. I don't trust anybody that creeps out a dog. Good news is, we had something to bond over, and hopefully these tigers will quit trying to kill me in the future. They slept on the bed with me until the motorcycle roared up again. I figured they'd won out, so I got up and opened the door. They didn't budge, so I left the door open. Fine, but don't make a habit of it. A lady needs her privacy when she sleeps, I said. I laid back down, but I couldn't sleep. I turned on the old black and white tube box that still somehow worked, and finally conked out watching reruns. I dreamed of the alligator Mary again. This time she was surrounded by herbal arrangements in pots and jars, like the one I made today, but they were huge and elegant. There were candles, too. Again, I prayed as I knelt before her, but this time I remembered what I prayed. God, help me become who you made me to be, and give me the strength to get there. I woke up to doggy nails clicking across the kitchen floor. It was morning. I gotta admit, I had a hard time reading today, so I probably had to edit a lot of stuff out. And my husband came home and turned on the shower. He was gone for a few days. I'm like, yeah, he comes home in the middle of me recording. But that's okay. But again, thanks for hanging out. And hopefully I will see you in chapter 5. Bye. But sometimes, Claire, she wanted to know me. Damn it. Claire stuck a few pieces of herb flowers behind her hair. Dang, we could have sprayed this. She keeps it next to the register so she can... Claire got up and came back with a small whisker. It was full of sand, and I wondered where all... I had a hard enough feeling, but doesn't make... But sometimes tragedies strike when they... We went back, and she sat and... Her cheeks began to suck in, and she stared at me like I was going to have awakening. Why can't I read today?